Dana White stood next to the President of the United States and called it the greatest fight card ever assembled. Not one of the greatest, not a historic moment for the sport, the greatest ever. That's the bar he set, in front of the entire world, with the White House behind him. And then the card dropped. No John Jones, no Conor McGregor, no Topuria versus Makhachev. The four names that would have actually justified that claim, gone. So when you make that kind of promise and the product doesn't come close to backing it up, what does that actually cost you? This is why UFC White House will be the biggest disaster in UFC history. Dana White and Donald Trump go back a long time. Trump hosted UFC events at his properties before the sport was mainstream, back when most athletic commissions wouldn't touch MMA and the mainstream press treated it like a fringe curiosity. White has been publicly vocal about that loyalty for years. None of that is new. What's new is that for the first time, the political relationship stopped being background context and became the product itself. The White House wasn't just a location, it was the entire pitch of the event. UFC wasn't holding a fight that happened to have political adjacency. It was selling the idea that MMA had finally reached the highest seat of American power, and that Dana White was the man who took it there. Think about what the UFC was actually trying to buy with this event. Global media attention that no fight card, no matter how good, generates on its own. Mainstream crossover to an audience that doesn't follow the sport. People who don't know who Tom Aspinall is, don't watch pay-per-view, but will tune in because the White House is on the screen. Political capital, in a moment where the UFC's leadership has made its alignment very clear. And for Dana personally, something close to a legacy moment. Proof that the sport he built from a struggling regional promotion into a global business had finally arrived somewhere permanent. That's what was being sold, and selling it required a specific kind of language. You can't announce a White House event and say, "We've got a solid card." You have to say, "Greatest ever." You have to go all the way, because the venue demands it and the moment demands it. The problem is that language creates a contract with your audience, and the audience remembers. Call it the greatest ever, and that's the only standard that matters now. Not pretty good for a PPV, not solid co-main lineup. And every fan watching knows exactly what that requires. The gap opens right there, before a single punch is thrown. Conor McGregor is the single biggest draw in UFC history. His name on a card moves numbers no other fighter can touch. He's been out for years, tied up in legal matters and stalled negotiations, and none of that got resolved for this event. He wasn't even in the conversation. Topuria versus Makhachev was the most anticipated fight in the lightweight division before this event was announced. Two generational talents, a clean title fight that had been building real momentum. The White House stage would have given it a platform unlike anything in MMA history. It stayed on the shelf. Then there's Sean O'Malley, a former champion, a genuine star, someone who can carry a card. He got booked against someone who doesn't move the needle at this level. A showcase fight on the biggest night in UFC history isn't just a misuse of the slot. It's a signal about how the whole card was built. White House security capped attendance at around 5,000 people. A standard UFC pay-per-view fills 15,000 to 20,000. Tickets were reportedly running upwards of $1.5 million per person. The fans who drove hours to regional shows, who bought pay-per-views when the production quality was rough, who argued MMA's legitimacy to anyone who'd listen, those people weren't getting into that building. So when Dana White talks about bringing MMA to the biggest stage in the world, it's worth asking who that stage was actually built for. On its own terms, away from the greatest ever framing, this is a solid UFC PPV. Decent matchups, some real talent. On a random Saturday, nobody's complaining. But that's not the context. The context is that Dana White made a claim, demanded McGregor, demanded Topuria Makhachev. Against that standard, a solid card is a failure, because it is one. The spectacle got assembled first, the venue was locked in, the declaration got made, and then the fights got filled in around whatever was politically and logistically available. Every great UFC card in history started with the fights. This one started with the moment and worked backward. Core fans noticed. The post-announcement discourse wasn't celebration. It was a running inventory of everything missing. The absence of the right fights became the actual story. The UFC built its entire identity on one thing: the best fighters in the world fighting each other with nothing getting in the way. No protected names, no political favors, no filler. That was the promise every time you bought a pay-per-view. That promise is the foundation. Everything else sits on top of it. Topuria versus Makhachev was the most anticipated fight in the sport. Two generational champions, a clean title unification that fans had been waiting on. And the White House stage would have given it a platform unlike anything in MMA history. It stayed on the shelf. So the biggest event the UFC has ever staged couldn't get its biggest fight made. That's not a scheduling problem. That's a priorities problem. Then there's the name. The President of the United States called this event Freedom 250. Not a fight night, not a UFC card. A branded political product with the word freedom in the title, tied to the sitting administration. The moment that name dropped, this stopped being a sports event and became a piece of political theater, and the president became a promoter. Think about what that actually means. A head of state is now personally attached to whether a UFC card lands or flops. His credibility, and by extension the credibility of the office, is riding on whether Dana White can put together a card worth watching. That's an extraordinary thing to stake on a fight show. And if the card underdelivers, if the pay-per-view numbers disappoint, if the discourse the next morning is about everything missing, Freedom 250 doesn't just become a punchline for MMA fans. It becomes a punchline on the world stage. Combat sports has always held fans across political lines because the fights were the point. The moment they stop being the point, that neutrality collapses, and you're running a global business that just picked a side.